The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
All right, so I was trying to figure out a way to reintroduce you to everybody. And I was like, oh, I know what I'll say. I'll say the prodigal son has returned. And then I was like, I don't even really know what that means. I use that term a lot. I don't know what that means. So I chat GPT'd it and I said, hey, what does the prodigal son returns mean? And is it a good thing or a bad thing? And it turns out it's kind of a bad thing. It's like a biblical reference to Luke leaving Jesus or leaving his home, squandering all his inheritance and basically making a mess, and then returning home to beg for forgiveness.
I guess I'm here to beg for forgiveness, guys. So,
Yeah, exactly. All right, everybody. He is back, Elijah Kahlenberg. Dude, it's great to see you. Great to have you. I really wanted to kind of have you on to talk about, obviously, a few things that, are really in the news. And last week I had Greg Stoker on and we touched on this. So let's get into it, because I honestly want your opinion on this whole Muhammad Khalil situation. Like, was that somebody you knew? Because obviously what he was doing at Columbia last summer, I mean, hell, you were one of the leaders at UT Austin doing your, student protests for really the ungenociding of Palestinian people. That's what it was about. I talked last week with Greg also about the fact that, first of all, this was last summer. It was Christian, Muslim students and faculty that were all simply protesting the war. Anyway, give us your thoughts, man. Is that somebody you knew? What do you know about him? What can you share with us?
Yeah, I don't know Khalil personally, but I know many in his general circle, some of his comrades, his peers, people that call him a close friend. I am in contact with those individuals. And my general take on the whole situation is that this is the biggest affront to First Amendment rights in American history, arguably. Since at least the 1920s, that I can get a little to that history. Khalil was a student who led divestment and general, like you said, anti-genocide protests at Columbia University.
You know what? Talk about divestment really quick, because I have never really brought that up on the podcast, and I'd love for you to help everybody understand that, because it's really important.
Sure. There's a movement in Palestinian solidarity called the boycott, divestment, and sanction movements. So humans, individual people on the ground, can boycott Israeli goods. That means you're not buying Israeli products, especially those made in the West Bank and Israeli settlements. Divestment is an institutional level boycott of Israel. So our colleges, our businesses are all putting in money in Israel. And so what we are calling for through divestment is for the money that we are putting in tuition by otherwise supporting these organizations to be taken out of Israel. So, for example, at UT Austin, we have a system called the UT Investment Fund. And that investment fund puts a lot of money in weapons manufacturers and other organizations that are directly giving weapons to Israel to genocide the Palestinian people. So divestment is asking the institutions we frequent to remove their money from Israeli firms, from weapons manufacturers that are otherwise profiteering from the death and destruction of the Palestinian people. Sanctions is the government-to-government level. Sanctions is when a government puts sanctions on another government for human rights abuses. So the S of BDS is us asking for the American government to officially sanction Israel for its human rights abuses. So B is our level, the boycotts. D, divestment, that's the institutional level. S is the governmental level, sanctions. And so it's a three-tier approach, but yeah, all to remove money from Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza and otherwise the human rights abuses and apartheid in the West Bank.
Okay, BDS, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'll tell you what's crazy is I guarantee you if you poll American people, they would have no idea that divestment even needed to happen, because they would have no idea that American universities, colleges, pension funds at the state level, that what other country are we putting all this money into? None.
Yeah. I can't make a parallel. I can't make another example. Not even our allies in Western Europe have this kind of relationship with us. But we know from historical precedents that the only way you get these nations to change their policy is through divestment. Best example in the world, apartheid South Africa. There was a huge divestment campaign started at Columbia University, actually, on American college campuses, calling for the divestment of institutions, other groups that were profiteering from apartheid in South Africa, that were doing business with apartheid South Africa to influence them to change their policy. And so to me, the only way to get people to change is hit them where it hurts, hit them in the bank.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's been effective. We have historical precedents for this, and it definitely works.
Okay. Okay. Let me ask you this question. How are you doing, like, personally with, I guess, in your community, like in the Jewish community? I mean, are you still getting a lot of hate, and like even within your family, your extended family, like is that continuing to be difficult for you because you're continuing to be so outspoken?
That's a great question. I would say the hate has never stopped, but I think as the genocide goes on in Gaza, there are more Jewish individuals, especially younger Jews, who become awakened to the iniquities of the state of Israel. I think it's our generation, especially in comparison with the boomer generation and the Gen Xers of the world. Our generation is much more critical of the state of Israel, even much more anti-Zionist, I would say. And so I think I have a lot more sympathetic voices from my generation of Jews. It's more the older Jews that have particular issues with where I'm coming from, my ideology. But even those older Jews, the way I go about broaching these conversations with them is through a language they can typically understand. So, for example, with the Khalil case, the way I've been going about combating the fact that he should be deported is through Jewish American historical precedents. One of the best historical precedents I reference is a few decades ago, there was a Nazi march that was planned for Skokie, Illinois. This was an attempt for white nationalists to champion Holocaust denial, anti-Jewish sentiments in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood in Illinois. And the town tried to say, no, you can't do that, right? And the white nationalists said, well, it's free speech, right? Even hate speech is protected speech. And believe it or not, it was a Jewish lawyer from the ACLU who defended the Nazis' right to do that. And they ended up winning. They ended up saying, yeah, you can have these protests. And so you might not like what people have to say. It might even be hateful rhetoric. It might be abhorrent rhetoric. And I'm not saying that's what Khalil is doing by any stretch of the imagination. I am very much politically aligned with Khalil. But if you find the rhetoric abhorrent, you should at least agree to the First Amendment principle of freedom of speech. Even if it's hate speech, even if you find it abhorrent, even if, for example, there was a student blasting Hamas propaganda saying, oh my gosh, right, X, Y, and Z is deserved and Israelis should be expelled from the land, the most abhorrent rhetoric you can think of in our camp. Even that rhetoric has a right to be said in any space. It's a First Amendment liberty every citizen and green card holder is enshrined to. And Khalil was a green card holder, but apparently that didn't matter. And if you think it's going to stop at green card holders, you're very much mistaken. Citizens are next on the chopping block.
Yeah, no, I want to talk about that in a second. I mean, I'll tell you, the thing that to me has been really the biggest eye opener is one, I have talked to a lot of people to see, hey, was this guy a troublemaker? Was this guy radical? Was this guy militant even? And again, across the board, I talked to some folks at Columbia and everybody said, absolutely not. And the biggest thing that they said was he also has nothing to do with, again, the boogeyman, quote unquote, Hamas. You know how I feel about that organization. The problem is the Trump organization, from Trump down, and especially like, what's his press secretary, Catherine or Karen Levitt, or all these people, all they do, Mike Johnson, Speaker Johnson, all they do is say pro-Hamas when it's really pro-Palestinian people, that the blurring of that line between Palestinian human beings and the big bad wolf boogeyman Hamas, which again, to this day, I think is a total scam, but that's for another time. That's the problem. And they're leveraging that myth of Hamas and quite frankly, the fear of that to basically bring, this poor kid, man, it's pretty insane. But I think you're right as well that like, hey, it starts with the green card holder because that's the low hanging fruit. But then what happens if a American citizen that was naturalized 20 years ago from a country in the Middle East starts being boisterous? Do they try to take that away? Probably.
Yeah, I would say so. And again, there is historical precedent for this. Going back, because I am a Jewish individual, so I am very well aware of Jewish American history. 1920, under the Woodrow Wilson administration, he engaged in something called the Palmer Raids. He directed his DOJ to infiltrate Jewish political spaces to round these people up and deport them, many of whom were citizens to Russia under the claim it was the Red Scare, they're communists, we have to deport them. So yeah, American citizens for political speech that America considers to be a national security threat have been rounded up and deported in the past. So the belief that they won't come for citizens next is completely ahistorical. They have and they will. And this is the most fascistic administration on this issue that you can imagine. So yeah, it's definitely not a stretch of the imagination to say citizens are next. I myself, I'm a dual citizen of Canada. I talked about this with previous people. I'm worried that I could be deported to Canada, but Trump says he's going to annex Canada, so I guess he has to give me citizenship after he does that.
Yeah.
Good luck, but it's not a stretch. Americans are on the chopping block, and it's a very scary reality.
I mean, let me ask you this: what do you think? Like, I honestly, I've been very surprised at just how all in Trump is on this. And when I say on this, I'm talking about the connection with Israel. It's like, I honestly thought he hated Netanyahu. I thought their relationship fell apart in 2020 when Netanyahu congratulated Biden so fast. So then I start thinking like, okay, is this a quid pro quo for all that money that Miriam Adelson and AIPAC gave? And that's what I thought the cabinet picks were: Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, Mike Huckabee, Elise Stefanik, like every single one down the line, actually. Ironically, the only cabinet pick of his that was not pro-Israel was Matt Gaetz, and he's the one that got removed, and then Pam Bondi got put in his place. So originally I thought, okay, this is all the quid pro quo, and I thought it would kind of end there. But man, he is doubling and tripling down to where I think a lot of normal white American MAGA people are waking up and they're like, wait a minute, what is going on? Are we Make America Great Again, or is this Make Israel Great Again? What do you think is going on?
Yeah, I loved your last line there, because even the claim, going back to Khalil, to deport them is that his rhetoric is a national security threat to the United States of America. I don't think I've ever heard Hamas threaten America, even if he was pro-Hamas, which he isn't. How is that a national security threat for us? It's a national security threat for Israel. So at the end of the day, they're putting Israel before America, right? This is a national security threat for Israel, maybe not for America. So, it's clearly Israel first for the reasons why that is. So one of them is obviously money, right? Like you said, Miriam Adelson gave him nearly $100 million if he was elected to annex the West Bank, to recognize Israel's annexation of the West Bank and Gaza. But there has to be a level of blackmail to this, right? I think that there was a rupture in Netanyahu and Trump's relationship even before Netanyahu congratulated Biden on the election win. It goes back even to when Trump was trying to hammer out a deal, right? His kind of BS two-state solution that was like a bunch of pockets for the Palestinian people. But he made references that Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the PA, was much easier to deal with than Netanyahu. And he said, Bibi, you don't actually want a deal, do you? And Trump said this on tape. And Netanyahu's like stammering and saying, I don't know. But Trump, I think, recognizes Netanyahu's a bullshitter. Like, he's an evil person. So the question arises, why does he continue to do this? He knows it's wrong. There's a quid pro quo aspect for sure. I think with the Gaza stuff, they probably sold it to him as saying, oh, you're going to get some Trump hotels in Gaza. What Kushner was saying during the election, or right after October 7th, that you'll get Trump hotels in Gaza. You'll make it a resort. I think that's what Trump believes. But I think there's also a level of blackmail going on, because he's just so embedded. I've never seen a politician go this hardcore for another country. I'm not necessarily the most conspiratorial individual, but I mean, people talk about the Epstein stuff, maybe that they had some stuff on him and his connections to Israeli security and intelligence. And so there could be an aspect to that. Your guess is as good as mine, but I think they got some blackmail on the guy. We could postulate what that is. I know there's been accusations he's done some sexual devious behavior. Possibly that's what it is. But your guess is as good as mine. I think money, quid pro quo, blackmail, trifecta. I think that's what's going on here for sure.
Well, I think the Epstein files, to me, that is such a clear indicator of something, because for 4 years, all the conservative pundits and all the guys that are banging their chest, from Charlie Kirk to Dan Bongino to Kash Patel himself, to all these guys were like, we want the Epstein files. We want the Epstein files. They promised, all of them promised that, hey, within 24 hours of being in office, we're going to release the Epstein files. And, here we are 45 days later, and not only have they not released it, but they're hiding it big time. Now, the question is, Are they hiding it because there's derogatory stuff about Trump in there? I actually don't think so. I think they're hiding it because there's derogatory stuff about so many people in the Trump network and so many people that are part of, the Zionist aspect. I also think they do not want to be on record and say Epstein worked for Mossad. Mossad gave the intelligence to Israel. The blackmail scheme was that, it was, but I think everybody knows Epstein. I mean, his last name is Epstein, for Christ's sake. Like, he wasn't working for Iran or Saudi Arabia. Like, obviously he was Israeli intelligence or part of Israeli intelligence. What do you think about we've talked about evangelical Christians and the power base that they have and Christian Zionism and all that. Do you think that that's fact into Trump's doubling and tripling down, like all the Christian Zionists, like your buddy John Hagee and like all those people that we've talked about? Do you think they have influence on him right now?
For sure. I mean, the evangelical base is a stronghold of the Republican Party, right? You can't get into Republican mainstream politics without being overtly pro-Israel. Trump just happens to be the most pro-Israel individual within that pro-Israel camp. But yeah, I would say there's definitely a Hagee-based influence there. But I would say it's leaning from previous years. We're seeing the evangelicals dip a little bit. Politically, I think the money isn't as strong as it once was. I think most white Protestant men are moving away from the evangelical faith and more towards more of a more mainstream doctrine of Christianity in the world, but more of a populist form of politics, one that more aligns with their economic interests rather than theological interests. But I mean, the influence is definitely there. Hagee runs a group called Christians United for Israel. It is the largest Zionist largest Zionist organization in the U.S., which definitely has influence politically. So just like Miriam Adelson is the Jewish Zionist side of that, we have Hagee, that's the Christian Zionist side of that. That money definitely plays a role, but I think it's waned over the past few years. I don't think they have the same influence they did during, say, Bush or shortly after 9/11, but it definitely exists.
Okay, that makes sense. Is that Hagee organization like QC or something? CUSI? Is that, or some acronym like that?
Yeah, that's exactly them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Those guys are big, man. There's big money. There's big money in that. Okay. One other thing I wanted to ask you is, as I've really just increased my education on all this stuff, and again, it's so different from me because I don't have true skin in this game. You have true skin in this game. Do you think that so much of what's happened, really the West Bank is the crown jewel that they're eventually wanting to take over because of Jerusalem and I'm assuming the biblical ties with Bethlehem and where Jesus was born and all that? Like, do you think Gaza was the appetizer and then the West Bank is the entree that they're really going after?
In terms of annexation, the West Bank has always been the crown jewel. Biblically speaking, you're right. That's Judea and Samaria of the Bible. Has less to do with Jesus, but more the more ancient Jewish and Israelite patriarchs of the Bible. The prophets Elijah, Amos, all those people are from Judea and Samaria. Samaria is the northern portion of the West Bank. Judea is the southern portion. But it's an interesting topic because when we talk about the modern state of Israel, the land that is currently in Israel isn't where necessarily a lot of Jewish history happened in the land. That's more like Philistine and Canaanite land historically. Gaza was where the Philistines were. If you know the story of Samson in the Bible, he went to Gaza to kill a bunch of Philistines, to bring a house upon him and bring a bunch of Philistines with him. The reason that Gaza is still on their radar, even though it's not necessarily as historically relevant as the West Bank, is because the concept of Greater Israel in the Bible is one that extends all the way from Egypt to Iraq. It extends from I'm blanking on the name of the river in Egypt to but it extends all the way to there to the Euphrates. So sorry, the Nile to the Euphrates. That's the common phrase. That's where outlined in Genesis, that is what is biblical Israel. There's different definitions of Greater Israel. One is just all of Palestine, so including the West Bank. But those who are biblically minded, Ben Gvir, Smoltrich, they want all the way from the Nile to the Euphrates. All of that land is what they want as the quote-unquote greater state of Israel. So there's a biblical component, but I think most Israelis care more about the historical ancestral ties, which doesn't really connect to Egypt or Iraq, but more the West Bank. So I think that's much more relevant to them.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. What about among your network of younger Israeli kids? Is it 50-50 split? 50 are like you, where they're, basically advocating for human rights, and 50 maybe just drink the Kool-Aid and they don't know any different? How does that look on campus?
Oh my gosh, Israelis specifically, it's the younger Israelis that are the most fascistic, genocidal individuals in the entire conflict. It is the younger generation of Israelis that's voting for Ben-Gvir, voting for Smotrich. This is a generation, they're the most radical of radical. They're the ones who have lived after the Second Intifada. They're the ones who just see rockets coming from Gaza, and so they've lost hope. They're the most radical of radical. It's ironic because it's American Jews that are beginning to awaken to this issue, to become more progressive, non-Zionist, anti-Zionist. They're trending in the right direction. It's actually the older generation of Israel, even though they're responsible for the Nakba and a bunch of iniquities against Palestinians, that are more prone to say, oh, Palestinians deserve a state. I'm not a two-stater, but at least they'll say, yeah, Palestinians deserve some semblance of sovereignty. The younger generation of Israel says, from the river to the sea, it's all Israel to me. They are the most racist, genocidal, narcissistic, Jewish supremacist generation in Israel's history, and it's reflected in their voting rights. In their voting patterns.
Wow. You're talking about what, like the age of 25 and below, or what do you think age-wise?
The 18 to 30 demographic, the ones that are currently in the IDF, right, because you have to serve right when you become 18, they're the most anti-Palestinian, most maniacal generation of Israelis yet. And that says a lot given the history of the land.
Wow. That is interesting. Okay, I didn't know that. Where do all these settlers fall into it? The ones in the West Bank that, are settling the land there and what seems like just stealing Palestinian land. Are they part of that younger generation, or are they young but not necessarily part of that group? Where do they fall into things?
I have a very crazy story about this exact topic. So I was reading the biography of a famous far-right settler. His name is Yehuda Etzion. A few decades ago, he gained worldwide attention because he tried to blow up Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. And then later on in life, I think this was like 5 or so years ago, he did an interview with the New York Times saying that the younger generation of settlers in the West Bank are too anti-Palestinian. They're too racist. And I'm like, you tried to blow up Al-Aqsa Mosque, and you're saying the younger generation is too anti-Palestinian, they're too racist, they're too violent. He basically said they have no ideology. They just want violence for the sake of violence. So a settler who was part of that first generation of settlers after 1967, condemning the younger settlers as even more crazy as his generation of settlers. So that is indicative, I think, of the current situation. You'll notice that it's mainly youth groups that are comprising the violent factions in the West Bank against Palestinians. When I was there, I lived on a Palestinian farm. There was a group of settlers who tried to come usurp the Palestinian farm I was living at. All of them were my age. I don't think a single one of them was above 25. So yeah, it's definitely the young ones that are the most violent, racist, anti-Palestinian, expansionary a-holes in the entire land by far.
Yeah. They're violent, man. I watched some of those videos and I'm just like, oh my God, these kids are deranged. They're absolutely deranged. Okay, let me ask you this. Where do Christians fit into what's going on in Israel? Like, I know there are Palestinian Christians, I think. Like, what side are they on? Who likes them? Who doesn't like them? Where do they fit into things?
It's a very interesting question. So politics, especially over the last 20 years in Palestine, has moved towards a more Islamic lens, right? In terms of resistance. Hamas, Islamic Jihad are some of the big players in Palestinian politics that you typically hear about. And if you're a Christian, you're probably not going to join an Islamist movement. I mean, Hamas advocates for one Islamic state from the river to the sea. Palestinian Christians don't want to live as dhimmis, as subjugated second-class citizens again. So they don't really fall in the Hamas camp. But a lot of them believe more in terms of secular socialist resistance. The group PFLP, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, was founded by a Palestinian Christian from the city of Lid and Romleh, and their whole intention was socialist Marxist decolonization. And they were a very revolutionary group because they believed that Arab nationalism was reactionary. So they didn't support Yasser Arafat or the PLO because they said Arab nationalism is a reaction to Jewish nationalism, and it's foreign from the land. It really has no root in our history. What the PFLP advocated for was one state that's neither Jewish nor Arab, but has a common identity, where Jews Arabs, Israelis, and Palestinians would integrate into one Palestinian people that has both Jewish and Arab characteristics. They're both full and equal participants under the same identity. So it was very revolutionary. And Palestinian Christians, even though they're a huge minority, tend to gravitate toward those spaces, something that's pro-equality for everyone in the land. Of course, that entails ending the Jewish supremacist state of Israel, but in its ashes, creating something that allows everyone to be equal and members of the same identity. And I think Palestinian Christians have been at the forefront of this, not even in Palestine, in places like Syria and Lebanon, championing ideologies like a pan-Levantine ideology where everyone in the Levant is equal. They have been at the forefront of this ideological battle, and they've been very revolutionary and progressive throughout the whole way.
Got PFLP.
Yes, Popular Front for the Liberation.
I remember you talked about them in, I think, our first episode together. You really like those guys, right? And you like that methodology?
Yes, I agree with their ideology of what the land should be. I would say I add an extra element to their ideology. I just say I take their ideology and go one step further by ascribing a specific identity to what Palestinian would be. And so I say that everyone from the river to the sea should unify around one of two ideologies, right? Everyone should either say we're Semitic, because Jews and Palestinians are both Semitic people, so create a Semitic state. We're both Semites. From the river to the sea, let's unify around what unites us, and that's our Semitism. Or we could consider ourselves both Canaanites. Both Jews and Palestinians trace their origins back to the Canaanite peoples, right? The Israelites of the Bible, even though it's not said in the Bible, this is something acknowledged historically, are a derivative of the Canaanite peoples. Palestinian people, same exact concept, hail from the Canaanite peoples. The Palestinian Thob is a Canaanite Thob, right? Hebrew is a Canaanite language for Jews. Palestinian Arabic has Canaanite influences. That's something that unites us. Let's call ourselves Canaan and Canaanites and unite around that. So I take the PFLP's ideology and add a specific element of what our nationalism would look like beyond just Palestinian. And so we're very similar. I am supportive of pan-Levantine measures, as so is the PFLP, but I just add an extra caveat about what that specific nationalism will be. They say it's not Jewish or Arab, but I add what that would specifically look like. So yeah, I am supportive.
Gotcha. And I think you said it earlier, like, isn't Muhammad Khalil, like, he subscribes to that ideology, right?
I believe so.
Okay.
He's not Hamas.
Okay. Yeah, no, he's definitely not Hamas. I mean, dude, I gotta pull back the curtain on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, man. I swear to God, these guys are a scam. Okay, let me ask you a couple more things. Let's see. Do you have any thoughts on, I did an episode last week on Muammar Gaddafi and kind of what took place with Libya and basically how, Gaddafi fundamentally was doing incredible things for his people. I have some Libyan friends and I asked their parents, what did you guys think of Gaddafi? He was loved. I mean, absolutely loved. But he was taken out by Hillary and Obama during that regime. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you have any knowledge on that, on Gaddafi or anything?
For sure. I think the most indicative quote was Hillary's quote, right? We came, we saw, he died, right? So there was a huge attempt to get him out, and they don't even hide it. I think he was pretty beloved by his people. I would diverge ideologically with him. He was someone that was very pan-African. He would dress in these African garbs, and I think most in Libya were like, you're a Semite, you're an Arab. Why are you dressing like you're from sub-Saharan Africa? So people thought he was a little quirky of an individual, but nothing wrong with that. Like you said, he was doing great things economically. I think he had more of a socialist tangent to his economic reforms, which I would be very supportive of. But I mean, culturally, I think he was a little bit of a weird guy.
Yeah. I think he was a weird guy, but the reason I even did an episode on him and talked about him was, I'm just trying to help people understand that, maybe the people we've been told are the dictator, awful human beings of the world that need to die. Maybe there's another side to that story, Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein. I mean, going all the way back to the Shah of Iran and all that, like, maybe there's more to it than what we've been told. And the more to it becomes, again, that small faction of people in the U.S. government that wanted regime change. They wanted covert regime change. They wanted, for me it all, and I think we talked about this last time, but, it goes back to like George H. Bush was really the kingpin of this. And then like he handed the baton to Clinton, and then Clinton handed it to George W. And I do think that group of neoconservatives, Dick Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Condoleezza Rice. I do think that group was the one that came up with, the New American Project. And they basically said, okay, we need something. And then that something was 9/11. And then 9/11, they milked that for 20 something years. That's why I'm worried right now that like another 9/11 type event might happen under Trump, and Trump will milk what those guys milked for another 20 years. Everything to me is a playbook, man. And I look back at the things that have happened and I almost feel like, okay, they're going to just go back to the playbook and do something that was done before.
The playbook was so absurd, but it worked perfectly in the early 2000s because Americans were very ignorant about the Middle East. They were able to Saddam Hussein, a secular Ba'athist, which called for pan-Arabism. He was killing Islamists, right? He hated Al-Qaeda. He hated these Islamist groups. America was able to say that this man was an Islamist. Like, this man is the antithesis of Islamism in the Middle East. But somehow America convinced its people that Saddam Hussein was hiding weapons of mass destruction, harboring Al-Qaeda, pro-Al-Qaeda. He was responsible for 9/11. It's so absurd that, like, anyone in the Middle East can be like, what? Like, this makes no sense. How are you saying Saddam Hussein, who persecutes Al-Qaeda, who hates Al-Qaeda, is responsible for 9/11? And I think Americans have educated themselves since that event. Before 9/11, there wasn't much of a reason to know about Middle Eastern politics. But I think at this point, Americans can see, yeah, that's BS. That makes no sense. Why are we doing this? And clearly, there was two beneficial reasons, right? One, of course, was oil. There was an economic incentive. And also, there was the Israeli tangent to it. Netanyahu had been clamoring for a long time in American political circles to get Saddam Hussein removed. Iraq was always a very strong contingent in the Arab world for Palestinian resistance. Once fired Scud missiles at Israel, even though they didn't really land or kill anyone, which is obviously not the intent because then America would come in, but it's just a show of strength and solidarity with the Palestinian people. But Saddam Hussein was always a thorn in the back of Israel. So if you want to see who benefits the most, George W. Bush, Rumsfeld, Cheney, all of them getting oil money through regime change and getting their own corporations up there, but also Netanyahu and the far-right Likudniks in Israel for sure as well.
Got it. Man, Netanyahu has been in the mix a long time, too. That dude is just...
Now, he's usurped Israel's founding prime minister, Ben-Gurion, as the longest-serving prime minister in Israel. So he's getting along authoritarian lines at this point. He's not going to relinquish power no matter what.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, is he liked? Like, half the country likes him, or half the among Jewish Americans, is he liked?
Among Jewish Americans, so I will say amongst Israelis, he is the perfect reflection of their society. It is a Jewish supremacist, narcissist society. I think Norman Finkelstein said the same quote as me. He is the perfect reflection of Israel. American Jews, it gets a little more hazy. For my generation, probably not, where we're much more non-Zionist, anti-Zionist. Even amongst liberal Zionists, he seems repulsive. Groups like J Street hate him, which is a historical liberal Zionist organization here in America. American Jews are at a weird position. They typically take on the politics of whatever they have to defend in Israel. So when Yitzhak Rabin was in power and Oslo was happening, the American Jewish community had the reflexive nature of being liberal Zionists, saying, yeah, we're pro-peace. We want to support Rabin and the Oslo process, and we love whatever the government in Israel is. Once the revisionist Zionists took over, the right-wing Zionists, Likud and their affiliates, even more extreme parties like Otzmat Yehudit, Jewish Power, now that they're in power, the Jewish American community has to find a way to defend that to a large degree. And so they've had to alter their opinions. It's getting increasingly hard for them, but especially after October 7th happened, a lot of American Jews were doing propaganda for Israel to try and say, whitewash what was happening, to say, yeah, they kind of have to genocide the Palestinians. They got to do it. Like BS like that. It was very common in American Jewish spheres, especially amongst the boomer generation. But I would say it's much more split, whether that's the right approach. It's a generational divide. It's definitely the older ones that are in that line of thinking. But I have a lot of hope for my generation. And I think even the generation that comes after me will be even more anti-Zionist and non-Zionist and call for something that's equitable in the land, removing Jewish supremacy, ending apartheid, ending the genocide that stripped the land for a while, even before October 7th. And I think there will be substantial change with the younger generations, not the older generation that's reflexive in defending whatever Israel does.
Yeah, I think the boomer generation, they've just been brainwashed their entire lives. I don't think they have a chance. Gen X, I mean, some of us are waking up. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit. Millennials, I mean, they're probably going to trend your direction. You're considered Gen Z, right? Are you part of Gen Z? Okay. Dude, Gen Z, Candace Owens said it. She said, there's feisty. They're feisty. I think it is. But you know what I really have admired about your generation and you in particular is that, you guys are really calling a spade, to use my own term. Like you're not letting historical baggage or historical narratives influence what you're seeing. You're so much well versed than, quite frankly, anybody, but even your age group that isn't as well read as you are, they're calling balls and strikes, like I've talked to other younger people who may not know, they don't have any skin in the game. It's like my friend's kid who's like a super white Abercrombie and Fitch kid. God, I can't even use Abercrombie and Fitch as the example anymore because all the crazy stuff with their CEO. But my point is, even those kids, they're just calling balls and strikes. And they're like, no, dude, this is ridiculous. This is genocide that's happening. I'm not a fan of it. I don't care where it is. So anyway, all right. Anything else, man? Anything else you want to talk about?
I mean, I think we covered everything. This was a pretty expansive episode. Yeah.
That was great. All right, everybody. Hold on the line, Elijah. It's always a pleasure having this guy. I love him. All right. Hold on one second. Yep.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.